My name is Matthew Todd, and welcome to Inside the Scale Up. This is the podcast for founders and executives in tech looking to make an impact and learn from their peers within the tech business. We lift the lid on tech businesses, interviewing leaders and following their journey from startup to scale up and beyond, covering everything from developing product market fit, funding and fundraising models to value proposition structure and growth marketing. We learn from their journey so that you can understand how they really work, the failures, the successes, the lessons along the way, so that you can take their learnings and apply them within your own startup or scale up and join the ever-growing list of high-growth UK SaaS businesses. Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. Excited today to be joined by Jeff Williams, CEO, co-founder, enroly. Great to have you here.
Thanks a lot for having me, Matt. I'm a long-time listener, so absolutely honoured to be on the show today.
Oh, no worries. Great to have you here. Looking forward to hearing more about your background, about your journey as well. Do you want to kick things off by giving our audience a little bit of background about yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. Starting with myself, I'm a lifelong entrepreneur, I guess you could say. Kids were into music and the arts and other things. I was always obsessed with business, to the point where I used to have a sign on my wall when I was about 14 saying, what could I provide and or service the world with, or something to that effect. So I was a bit of a weirdo when it came to entrepreneurship. So that's kind of been in my blood for a long time. Fast forward to where I am now. I've had one previous company that had various successes and failures, which was in the television industry, funnily enough, at sort of the turn of online video and YouTube and things like that quite a while ago. But then basically fell into the international student recruitment and admissions industry after that business, and spent about 10 years in that sector. So traveling the world, recruiting students, sort of leading admissions teams, and ultimately became a bit of a subject matter expert in that space, which then led me to found enroly in late 2017. And enroly is automation software to help universities recruit students from abroad. So it does things like sort of admissions automation, compliance automation, and general onboarding.
Sure. No, sounds interesting, and look forward to getting into some of the detail around that. So for people in the audience who are not as invested as you in that field and don't know what's involved, can you give us a bit of background about that whole kind of international admissions, attracting students, how that whole kind of area works?
Yeah, it's an interesting industry. It's sort of off the radar. You wouldn't typically think about, if someone said, could you name the top 5 or top 10 exports in most Western countries, it would very rarely make the list. But in many countries, it is in the West especially. It's in the top 5, top 10 exports. So it's in the UK, it's a £32 billion industry, for example, that is sitting sort of under the radar and doesn't have a lot of attention from the tech world, apart from sort of your old school players, I suppose, that have been around for decades. So what we effectively do, or what the problem that we solve is bringing these students in from abroad. Hundreds of countries can be quite complicated for a university. It's an incredibly seasonal business as well. You've only got 1 or 2 intakes per year. And basically where we come in is at the point where the student has an offer, and that sort of phase of the bottom of funnel phase through to the student arriving. So if you were to take a sales process, like buying a house, etc., you go and view the property, speak to the agent, it's all fun and games. Then when you make that offer, it suddenly becomes serious, and you've got agents involved, you've got solicitors involved, you've got various stakeholders. So that's really what universities are faced with. And the main issue or problem that they feel is largely through attrition. So they'll get students very far in this process. The complexity of paperwork and compliance and things like that means that these students don't end up making it. Every time they lose a student, that can be tens of thousands, or even, 30, 40, 50,000 pounds of lost revenue per student. Not to mention, it's a huge impact on that human being the student that's trying to study abroad and, get on with their life.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that was that profitable for university. So if someone does fall out at that point in the process, is that genuinely lost revenue then? That's not something that just automatically goes to the next person on the list that there's a space for, or?
Yeah, typically it does. It will mean at that point in time, because the complexity of restarting the process, it often means that there's not enough time for the student to say go and pick another university. So that
Okay.
doesn't mean they're lost completely. The student may be deferred, but that might mean they're deferred for an entire year to the next intake, for example. Or what often happens is the student will obviously lose a bit of heart when it comes to that particular choice, and they will
Yeah.
inevitably end up swapping to somebody else. So yeah, it's not necessarily a binary, they're lost or they're not. But obviously you want to convert those students, from a business sense, they want to convert those students into the semester they're intending to study, and otherwise you're duplicating your efforts.
Yeah, yeah. And are universities themselves treating it like a business? I know I've worked many, many years ago. I have worked in a few different university departments, and I know some are more business-like, some are more academic than others. Quite a different environment to work in. So, yeah, what is that environment inside those universities like?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a hybrid, I would say. They're not full blown cutthroat commercial enterprises, but
Yeah,
at the end of the day, they are also, if you were to value them as companies, even the smallest university in the UK is most likely $1 billion corporation. Many of our clients are doing £500 million in revenue each year, which actually shows the size and scale of these organizations. So,
yeah.
would I say they're commercial? There's an element of commerciality. Some are more commercial than others, but I'd say it's a bit of a hybrid. And there's a recognition that international students, for example, are bringing in revenue that are contributing to domestic students. They're contributing to research. They're contributing to facilities. So there is an understanding at the highest level in every university in the UK of the value and importance of this business.
I see. No, interesting. It's not a perspective that I think many people are aware of exactly how valuable those organizations are.
Yeah, it's incredible, really, when you think about it that way, especially in the startup world, right, where you're getting valued and you're raising money,
Yeah,
and you're seeing unicorns emerge and whatnot, and to think that these universities are just plodding along, doing the level of business and revenue, and not to mention research impact, contribution to local communities and things like that. I mean, you get a lot of towns and cities around the UK where the university is the number one employer by a factor of 5,000. So they're
yeah, yeah.
incredibly important.
Yeah, no, fascinating. So, when it came to that work that you were doing inside of universities and traveling the world, working on this admissions with them, what was the insight or what was the thing that the trigger that then led you to think, okay, well, actually, maybe there is a gap here for a product, something that needs to exist.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spent a lot of time in the sector, and so got a handle across all of the sort of those recruitment and admissions and compliance functions that were occurring. The part of the business I most enjoyed and was most sort of passionate about was the marketing and recruitment element from an international standpoint. I found that incredibly challenging, where ultimately you're selling a product into a market where maybe 0.001% of the population can actually purchase what it is
Yeah,
that you're selling. So, to put in perspective, about 600,000 international or higher education international students will come to the UK each year, but you've got 1 billion people, plus in some of these countries alone.
yeah,
So, aggregate that around the world, you're finding needles in haystacks, and that's where enroly was born initially. I saw this problem that we were spending millions of pounds, right, in marketing and recruitment activities, and for the most part you're attracting students that are not fit to study abroad, and that can be for
okay,
various reasons. From they don't have the financial capability, they don't have the academic background, they don't have the English. It's quite brutal in that sense. I wish that everyone could get access to come to the UK to study, or America or Australia or whatnot, but that is the reality of the business, that at the
yeah,
end of the day you have to have the resources, be it your own finances, scholarships, etc. So where enroly was really founded was through this concept of solving that problem of how do we find the right type of student. And the initial concept was, well, a lot of these students must know each other. They must go to similar schools, mix in similar friendship groups, etc. So I sort of came up with this idea was, well, if we could connect with a current student, they could recommend a friend or family member that's planning to study abroad, and we could connect them with approved assistants in their home country for the university they want to study at. So to provide some context, internationally, a lot of universities will have representatives, so private sector representatives, sort of like travel agents in the old world, or exactly like travel agents. There are based thousands of these guys, 5,000 plus active agents recruiting to the UK around the globe. And what we did is we basically signed partnerships with the university, said, hey, you onboard your current students. They can refer a friend. We'll make sure they get introduced to someone who is approved to help these students through your process. Because there's a lot of people out there helping students as well that don't have the correct agreements, and it's not an official representation of that university. Okay. So that's sort of the initial plan, was let's do that. And that sort of was the phase one of Enroly, but not what we do today, funnily enough.
Yeah. So that phase one then, is that something you were doing alongside the day job? Is that something you left the day job for? What was that like?
Interesting story. I think many founders have their interesting story. I started, I was working in a venture arm of a private education company. So they were looking at potential investments in the sector. Yeah. I put my hand up because I was very interested in this space, obviously, with my sort of keen entrepreneurship interest. Thought I'd love to get amongst startups and, tech companies that my company that I was working for at the time would like to invest in. Yeah. I subsequently attend a conference. I meet an investor at a bar. I start telling him about this idea that I have. So we had done nothing at this point, not even, tested it. Yeah. Start telling him, he's like, well, why don't you quit your job and do it? And I'm sort of like, well, I've got a mortgage. I've just got married. I'm back to the real world. And he sort of opened my eyes to this. Well, why don't you come down to my office on Monday? So this is a Friday, by the way. Come down to my office on Monday. We're running, actually, just by coincidence, we're having some startups coming in to pitch. I'll add you to the list, put a deck together. Let's see what happens. So that weekend, went home frantically, contacted my co-founder from my previous company, said, I think we're starting another business. Let's build a deck around this concept. And went in on the Monday, pitched. I then went straight to the airport, flew to Hong Kong for work. So went to the pitch, straight to the airport. Got a call the next day saying, hey, we'd like to make a seed investment. It's conditional on you quitting your job, though. And just all of a sudden, I went, in the space of just a few days, sort of just plodding along with my, well-paid corporate job that I was really enjoying, thinking, this will be, the next 10, 20 years of my life. Maybe I won't do this business thing again. And all of a sudden, this being laid in my lap. And I remember I flew back from Hong Kong, gripping the armrests the whole way, thinking, I want to do this, but how am I going to explain this to my wife?
I can imagine. And I think many, many founders listening to this will be quite jealous about the prospect of being able to meet someone at a bar on a Friday and then beginning of the following week have some investment. But I have to ask, what was in that pitch deck?
To be honest, I Googled pitch decks, and I think being subject matter experts, able to convert that idea into a pretty sound format. Yeah. And I think it's something as a founder, the advantage of being a subject matter expert with an industry network and understanding the inner workings is, 80% of the challenge, I think. I don't know. To be honest, founders that go into an industry they don't know inside out, I don't know how they do it. I mean, credit to them. Must be such an incredible challenge. But that deck was, and also another thing, I guess I was very used to presenting as well. That was something I wasn't fazed by that. I think a lot of founders go into those meetings, you get super stressed, you forget your facts, your figures, your edge in the market, etc. So I think I went in with a bit of a nothing to lose attitude as well. And to give these guys a nod, it's Emerge Education, by the way. They're one of the leading venture funds for edtech in Europe and across the globe. When they invested in me, they were running an accelerator, which they no longer do. They're purely a fund now. So that was sort of the deal. They put in that seed investment. I went on to their 12-week accelerator, which was incredibly valuable because it'd been a while since I started a business, and especially I'd never started a tech startup either before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really fascinating how, you were able to turn that around so quickly, but I guess take quite an unexpected direction in your career so rapidly as well. It really does give meaning to the word accelerator in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. And those guys, they know what they're doing. it's incredible the value you can get when you're connected with people that have been there and done that. And much like your podcast, I love the nitty gritty elements of it, because it isn't glamour, and actually you need someone who can sort of walk you through what's about to happen. And to an extent, you do need to experience those, the different mistakes and identify opportunities, and whether you pivot or whether you persevere. But just having someone say to you, you can pivot, you can persevere, and that is going to happen. It completely changes your approach to business as well. So yeah, so very, very thankful to that accelerator experience. And I highly recommend them if you are given the chance, as long as their terms are fair and equitable as well. So just be careful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely do look at how good a deal it really is, and what they can add to it as well. But for the ones that are good, they are very, very good at genuinely helping you accelerate that journey. So yeah, on that accelerator then, what was the outcome of that 12-week process? How much of a product did you or didn't you have? How much in terms of potential interest in at least the concept did you have at that stage?
Yeah, it was a purely paper-based idea at that point. And one of the things with the accelerator was, it's a good concept, just let's pound the pavement and see if you can get some traction, basically. And that, again, for any founders listening or prospective founders, it's, don't waste time building a website, buying stationery, getting business cards, etc. Just put your idea on a bit of paper and just go and speak to someone who might buy it or might be interested in, and it's incredible the amount of feedback you will get, and the launching opportunity you'll get as a result of that. So basically what I did was I left my job, obviously, as did my co-founder as well. So I'm very much sort of the business and subject matter expertise. My co-founder is a product guy, so he's sort of a UX, UI designer, some background in automation as well, which is what we do. So we start off together and we build basically a hack together piece of tech, again, using a basic CRM as the underlying technology. So at this point, we're not even putting any code down at all, just trying to get a very basic working model to see if we can start to drive some traction. At this point, I start courting another friend of mine who's a super talented engineer who was working for Tesco at the moment, previously. And basically sort of started to say, are you interested? Because by this point, I'm sort of aware that, you need the three key players, right, in a startup. You need the hacker, the hustler, and the hipster. I'm the hustler, of course. I had the hipster being my product guy, and I was conscious that if we were going to build a genuine tech company, we were going to need that hacker character. And so I already had my eye on our CTO that has now been with us pretty much since day one, when he finally quits his job and joins. So back to your question, because I'm probably going off on a tangent here, is we build this very basic minimum sort of viable product, or whatever you want to call it, something that works. I go and leverage my network in the industry saying, hey, would you mind if we run a little test? Could you put this out in front of your students? We start to get some engagement. We start to get some referrals. We start to evidence connecting those students with agents. And we actually start to generate some revenue in that 12-week period. And as a lot of investors will tell you, and founders, especially in this climate, if you can demonstrate revenue early in a business, that gets a lot of people's attention very quickly, versus the companies that will monetize this later approach. So I was very old school in my approach, and as a result, we built that product, and then the culmination of that 12-week was a demo day for investors. So the accelerator brought in about 50 investors, and I went to raise a target, I think, of about 250,000. And I think within a week of that, we'd raised about £280,000 in addition to that initial seed. So it was a really, really good launching off pad.
Yeah, no, that's really, really a fantastic result from that kind of process, certainly out there with the ideal result that you would hope to get out of that kind of process. And I think, what you were saying about generating revenue early versus, we can monetize at any point in future when we choose to, when we want to, we don't need to be profitable yet. I think it speaks a lot as to whether you genuinely are delivering something of value, because there has been an exchange of value, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Unless you're, building deep tech, and there's some long-term vision and that makes sense. But for most startups, you're there to generate revenue at some point, and the sooner the better, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess pretty positive result then from that accelerator demo process. Then I'm kind of curious as to how the products then developed and ultimately shifted from that initial concept that you managed to prove pretty quickly to the version that you now have in place.
Yeah, so we keep building that product out. Now I've roped in my CTO, so we've now convinced him to quit his job. We've now got some financial resources to pay him, because he was leaving a rather large salary, as you can imagine, as a senior engineer, and give him some equity in the business as well. So our CTO is effectively a junior founder, I would say, in our team, and this is where we now start to build the underlying technology to do exactly what we want it to do. So product and tech being the two other guys are now focusing on that. And I'm now purely focused on sort of sales and building the brand. And so I'm working with universities. We sort of come up with this concept of white labeling the product and then actually putting it on the website of universities and kind of co-promoting it with them. We accelerate quite quickly with that. We get sort of, I forget what it was, maybe 20, 25 institutions that have white labeled this on their website. So very quick moving again, because of that industry expertise, which is again the value of being that sort of subject matter expert. Yeah. And we start to see the students flowing through. And so we're now seeing thousands of students engaging and referring, and the students getting to a point of accepting their offer, paying their fees, attempting to get visas and arrive in the UK. And this is where I start to see or be reminded of the high levels of attrition in the sector. So again, I was aware of this having been in the business, but now that it's vitally important to me, because we were only getting paid if the students enrolled, right? Because we were taking a commission on those fees.
Commission only.
Yeah, so commission only. So, so there's no real risk to the universities. We weren't charging them even a license fee for it. Yeah. So a revenue share type model. And so obviously every time we lose one of these students through attrition, we're losing potentially thousands of pounds. So we start thinking, okay, what's going on here? And then we realize, okay, well, these students, they often need sort of some more official help when it comes to that visa process. And on the other side of the coin, the universities are not giving them the documentation that they need to go and apply for a visa until very late in the process. So the whole process seems to be sort of falling apart at various stages. Okay. And so from there, we thought, okay, well, what if we, on our platform, we then brought on visa solicitors, so that we could also connect students with sort of immigration advisors or regulated advisors who could make sure these students move through the process. Yeah. So we start to do that. So now we've got this kind of platform emerging where we're generating the leads and we're also providing them help to ensure that we improve the conversion rate. So we did that for a little bit, and that did move the needle, but it didn't move it enough. We were still seeing, 30, 40, 50% of students leaking out of this pipeline that we believe should have been converting. And when we started to reach out to these students saying, hey, like you paid your money, you were ready to go, why aren't you here? I didn't get my documentation from the university till 3 weeks later than I thought it was going to come. Then my mum got sick, and so I had to do that for a couple of days. And then I had to go and, speak to the immigration advisor. And by the time we got ready, it was really busy. UKVI was swamped with visa applications, and it simply didn't come out in time. So we still weren't satisfied with that problem. And that's what leads us to our third pivot, if you will, which is now, oh God, we've identified another layer of problem, and maybe there's a chance we can solve that too.
Interesting. I think that's really interesting that because you priced your product in a particular way, in a way that reduced the risk but aligned interests with your customer, you were almost able to do a deeper dive into the real customer problems and pain points rather than the surface level ones, because you tried to solve those. Your interests were aligned, therefore you immediately exposed yourself to the deeper problem that was affecting your revenue because it affected their revenue. So I think that's a really, really, fantastic example of the power of, aligning those interests so well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really good point you raise that just my co-founder and I were talking about the other day, which is we see there's two sort of startups that emerge. One where you're really aligned with your customer and you have the same problem and you're solving it together. Then there's another type of startup, which is just as valid, by the way, but it just creates a different dynamic, as you've
Yeah.
touched on, which is where you're delivering something for your customer and you end up being focused on solving your own problems in the delivery of that service
Yeah.
rather than their problem exactly. And I think that is, one of those sort of hindsight 2020 secret sauce moments that you've touched on, where we were so aligned with the clients that and solving this problem, it's what led to our, the development of the software these universities are now purchasing from us today.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when it comes to pivoting as well. I see a lot of founders that say, oh, should we pivot? Shouldn't we pivot? Or we had to pivot. And I see it too often. It's because they are more aligned to their product and solution than they are to the customer's problems. So they can invest an incredible amount of time and money in building something that isn't really what anyone wants. And therefore they're kind of forced to pivot because they kind of bang that drum for as long as they can get away with before they have to actually admit, oh yeah, we're not really solving their problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all the classic cliches of kind of falling in love with the problem and your initial idea and your hypothesis and your assumptions. Like you've just, startup survival is just based on constantly proving those things. Can you go out and get evidence that hypothesis is correct or that assumption is correct? And, as soon as you do that, you start to see this, that build, measure, learn feedback loop, I think they call it. Like once you get that flywheel spinning and you get that momentum and you can keep that iteration going, that's where you just keep, those small touches of whether you pivot or whether you persevere, those decisions you make, and that infinite loop that just keeps spinning no matter, I think, we're now nearly 5 years in, that loop, and that just keeps on going. You never stop.
Yeah, and I think the word pivot is obviously very overused, but I think it's the difference between a change in direction and an evolution of the way you want to solve the customer's same core problems. And I think what you're describing is more of an evolution, I would say, based on a deeper understanding rather than a direction changing pivot. Oh no, let's go over here instead.
Yeah, you're right. It's I think the pivot is, you go out to build a video game and then you accidentally build Slack. As the story goes, that's a true pivot. You're right in the sense that it was a heavy evolution, I suppose.
Yeah. I think that's the right kind of when those values are aligned in the way that you described. So what did that evolution then, that kind of final evolution, look like? How did you start to work out what you needed to do for that and build into that?
Yeah, well, we had sort of the initial idea. I remember very vividly explaining the problem to my CTO, and I was saying, like, basically they've got this hugely seasonal business with a lot of documentation and manual processes to move these, like, sometimes 5,000 students through this process and a handful of staff. And I was kind of describing how I believed it should work. And I remember him saying, you're describing some pretty advanced automation software. We're going to need to raise more money if that's what you want to build, in the timeline I'd sort of suggested, which I think at the time was like 6 months. And so from there, we, again, straight back to market, like straight back to the universities and said, hey, these are the problems we think you're having. Do you agree? If we started to develop something that did this for you, would that be of interest? And that's where we sort of got the yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we started with a couple of our sort of closer clients that we'd built a strong relationship with and were somewhat invested in this journey we were going on as well as a startup, and managed to get one University of Greenwich, again, full credit to them and their incredible culture of innovation in that organization. They basically said, yeah, look, if you're willing to build it, we're willing to contribute to the development and sort of, be an informal sandbox, and we'll happy for you to chat to some of our key staff, start to build out a prototype. And, if it does what it says on the tin, yeah, we might take it. And that was basically it. We had nothing in writing, obviously a huge amount of risk always with startups, but we had enough buy-in and enough cooperation to and enough confidence really that we'd identified a huge pain point that was not served by anybody. Again, it was a bit of a black hole in the process. You've got, tech systems like CRMs, like, use Greenwich for as an example. They've got a CRM system, they've got a student management system, but it's very top of funnel focus. So it's that very much that kind of lead admissions, early stages of conversion focus. But then when you move into that bottom of funnel, pretty much every university was ultimately run off spreadsheets and emails. So the one advantage, as sometimes you get with enterprise software that we experienced, was you don't actually have a direct competitor other than maybe Microsoft, spreadsheets, or, maybe a retrofitted CRM or some other system that's been built in-house.
Yeah, but I guess you have existing things that are used as workarounds rather than something that is positioned specifically to solve those specific problems.
Yeah. Well, I heard a good quote recently. I don't know if it was on your podcast, maybe it was, that any piece of enterprise software can be built in a spreadsheet. And at the end of the day, and the beauty for us is these unis that we're working with had built the spreadsheet. So we literally were like, well, can you share with us what you've got? And, we suddenly got these crazy behemoths of spreadsheets that they talked us through, which kind of gave us an initial blueprint of a much deeper knowledge and understanding of what actually needs to occur through this complex process.
I see. And what you were proposing at that stage in terms of your own business model then, was that still the same business model? Was that still commission-based, or were you looking at other kind of pricing models for that?
No, this product was very much moving into a license product, so a fee for the software itself. Interestingly, we were able to keep the fee for that product relatively low because we were able to then layer these services we'd already generated on top of the platform. So in some markets, for example, where there's students from kind of particularly high-risk regions or difficult regions when it comes to visas, basically we can still connect those students to visa and immigration solicitors. So, not only was that pivot or evolution or whatever we want to call it, it sort of came full circle where some of that initial concept was then placed back on top of the platform that we ended up building. The referral concept is gone. Still a good idea, and maybe it will re-emerge at some point, but it hasn't hit our priority list yet.
I see. So now it's very, very focused on that one specific area of the process where that attrition was taking place, where it was hard to manage, hard to track, and as you say, there was no automation at place before your product.
Correct. And that the key thing to that process automation as well is that the processes differ quite greatly depending on the countries where the students are coming from, and that's what can cause such complexity, because it's not just a one size fits all supply chain. It's actually can be very different whether you're a student from China, from India, or from Nigeria. Many different things need to occur in that process. So we were, again, able to use that industry knowledge to build a system that catered to those underlying problems that maybe a lot of the existing tech players hadn't really focused on, because they were providing services across the whole university without sort of the laser focus that we have.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can imagine that as well, because you are solving the same problems, dealing with students from all over the world, that when you work with different universities, you bring that knowledge and that expertise to them as well. So exactly how they should be dealing with students from different areas. Yeah,
exactly. It's best practice out of the box. That's sort of what we call it. Ultimately, you can configure it to within an inch of its life if you like, but ultimately we plug it in and turn it on. It's already pre-configured to the requirements, and that's quite interesting. As a result of that standardization process across workflows and sort of data points and naming conventions and things like that, we've had a further evolution, which is the creation of a data insights extension on the platform. So now we actually basically saw this opportunity where, again, another problem in the sector, industry data was taking 1 or 2 years to come out because it was the government that ultimately had that aggregate data. Nobody else had it, right? So as we're signing up more and more universities, we start to get this feedback from institutions saying, do you know what's happening in this market? You guys have got hundreds of thousands of students flowing through. can you give us some insight as to what's occurring? And that's where we came up with this idea of, well, what if we built a data insights platform that allowed an institution not only to look at their own data, but then layer industry trends on top of it. So we kind of we call it Bloomberg for education internally, because the industry's never had it before. They've never had real-time data. They've never been able to see what's going on until 2 years later. And 2 years later is often too late to see that computer science was trending in Vietnam, for example. You need to know now so you can go and capitalize on that opportunity. So that's been flying off the shelves, and it's one of those, again, you go through that iterative startup process again. And it's one of the things I love about being in a tech startup and a tech company, is that you, just when you think the startup game is over, you come up with something like that, and you get to go through that fun of, building and delivering again.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I guess it's layering on those capabilities. You need the foundations there before you can build the next level on top of that, much like, any area within tech, really, whether it's like Amazon Web Services that started off very basic, that layered on more platforms and services, so on and so forth. And the things that people are able to build on top of platforms is just, incredible these days.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You need to be careful, obviously, that you don't just keep building everything that clients want. But at the same time, it's much easier to solve a problem and sell an existing client something. I think it's net revenue retention. If you can grow a company quite significantly once you get your user base big enough. If you're able to add value to those existing clients, you can actually generate 10-20% year-on-year growth just out of your existing client base, excluding any new clients you bring onto a platform. So that's, again, from a growth strategy perspective for any founder out there, especially in sort of the enterprise software space. As soon as you get that a large group of clients and you start speaking to them and you see any trends, it can be a huge opportunity to take advantage of that and actually build and deliver something for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Would definitely recommend people look at that, especially in the enterprise space. But when it comes to serving that market, especially with something so disruptive, coming from spreadsheets to a new, automation-driven platform to then data insights on top, how do you deal with the challenges of adoption and change within organizations like this, as well as, even think about pricing it, to give them some context to go forward with?
Yeah, it's an invasive digital transformation that we represent at a university. It touches their people, their process, their system. Yeah. So, at the highest level, it's very scary for an institution, especially anyone in the tech team. They're like, oh God, what are these maniacs planning to do, kind of thing. But a couple of things we've done is, one, we've made it very easy to integrate. We've done a lot of the heavy lifting on our side, so we know what systems they have. So that's sort of part one. Part two, to your question around that transformation for the people, is I have to give credit to my co-founder and his product team and the way that they design our software and the user interface. We apply something they call the Fisher-Price rule, basically. Anything that we put in front of these users needs to be very, very simple to use. And we try to maintain our system from an onboarding perspective, should only take 45 minutes to an hour to train a user to about 95% competency. Okay. So as soon as we feel something becoming sort of complicated or difficult or not intuitive, then it will get pulled back. We'll rethink how we're solving the problem, because you're right. It's, you ask people to use a very complex system, they'll bounce off the atmosphere. Yeah. And back to one of your first points about it being, ultimately public sector, a government institution, people don't necessarily have the invested interest to spend their weekends learning how to use a new system. Yeah. So one of our real secret sauces has just been keep it really, really simple. And when people find out that my co-founder, who ultimately designed the product, didn't really have any background in this sector, but just knows UI and UX, it really blows their mind, which is, again, something that is such an incredible art form. And we're lucky that we've got, a great product team that we've built out with our product manager and our principal designers as well, who are doing a fantastic job at maintaining that.
Yeah. So really making that experience as simple, smooth as possible, whilst demonstrating clear value, I guess, to those stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's got to be simple. And I think that's, again, the more legacy systems that have been around, and, are hugely complex. I think it's only been sort of the last half decade, really, that companies have considered their user interface in that way, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to enterprise systems. And I think a lot of companies now, it's really impacting their sales and their ability to impact and enter a market by just having a much simpler system to use.
Yeah, and I think the way technology is now, everyone has an extremely capable, high-performing computer in their pocket, right? That they're used to
Yeah.
using apps on. So I think gone are the days where these legacy systems could get away with poor UX, and you get people that just didn't care or didn't know that there was a better way of working.
Yeah, it is funny though when we go into universities, we do, people request the user manual and things like that, and
Right.
is there a PDF? And it's, we've got some training, and we've got it. We use a company called AppQs, which can build in-app training as well, which is a cool company if you need something like that for onboarding. And it's this, you get in this awkward moment where you're sort of saying there isn't a user manual. It's
Yeah.
like Gmail. Gmail doesn't have a user manual because it's just fairly obvious how to use 80% of Gmail without
Yeah.
having to read a PDF. So it is a bit of a gear shift for people when they're like, well, you've got this complex software that's managing things like compliance and admissions and onboarding, but there's no instruction guide on how to use it. And that, again, once that penny drops, you go, oh wow, okay, awesome.
Yeah. So definitely a strong education piece, but driven by that value and clear demonstration of value by the sound of it then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And one thing I'm curious about as well, you kind of mentioned that, much like public sector organizations that you're targeting as your customer base, in a world where your customer base, is very, very known to you, you can pinpoint the universities that you want to be customers that aren't customers, right? How do you approach kind of marketing and sales for your own business with that landscape of customers?
Yeah, I mean, I consider it a privilege that I know exactly who my customers are. Obviously,
Yeah.
again, a lot of startup founders, you're trying to figure out that product market fit. So for us, I'd say, one of the bigger challenges is more around that innovation curve, that adoption curve. Obviously, you've got some universities like Greenwich would have, very early adopters, innovators,
Yeah.
willing to take a bit more risk. And then you've got other universities that are, a little, the late majority. If you don't know about the adoption curve, go and Google it. It's definitely good to understand in the
Yeah.
software space. But the you know the challenge we sort of have then is identifying the people in the organization, the culture of that organization, and then ensuring that we are basically selling the product to the right people at the right time. Because you
Yeah.
also don't want to sell a product like this into an institution that isn't ready yet for that type of transformation. They
Yeah.
need it to be, more mature, more ubiquitous, more of an industry standard, versus those customers early on. But ultimately,
Yeah.
our marketing is very low cost. We do a lot on LinkedIn. That's our sort of platform of choice. We do a lot of sort of content, blogs, cold outreach, conferences. So, the marketing strategy in itself is fairly simple. It's more about now, making sure people are aware of the sort of the value adds we have on the platform, the additional extensions and services and things like that.
I see. Yeah, because I can imagine that for many people it might be quite a scary prospect. I mean, it's nice to know exactly who your customers are, but I can imagine it can be a scary prospect that can put them off going in with any kind of outbound approach in case they get the timing of the approach wrong, they approach the wrong people, and they, almost kind of close down avenues that are previously, perceived as open if they go in there with the wrong approach. I can imagine that can be quite daunting.
Yeah, knowing when to put the foot on the gas and the brake is really important, especially with enterprise software where you've got the fewer clients but larger. But the other thing is with those types of organizations, if you are sort of selling a product like that into large organizations, if you can pump the brake at the right time because it's not quite the right person, they're not quite in the right mindset. There's quite often other people as well that have
Yeah.
interest in that problem, or have a stake in it, and maybe more willing. And that's where it's really key to find that champion in an organization, because you do need the help, especially when you're what you represent is a digital transformation. If you've not got someone on the other side of that fence who's like, I want this, I'd like to do it, I'd like to see if we can make it happen, that's where the magic starts to happen. If you don't have that, and you're constantly pushing and selling versus kind of being pulled into the organization, then again, another reason just to pump the brake. Let's maybe just put them in a bit of a nurturing state, and come back in 3 months and see where we land at that point.
Yeah, and I guess that's the difference between having like an enterprise type of customer with the disruptive technology, innovative technology like yours. It's knowing that there will be people inside of those organizations that are also wanting to drive innovation, that know there is a better way than a tangled mess of spreadsheets or whatever it is that they're doing. So it's looking out for the people that are already trying to do what you want them to do, so that you can kind of connect with them and then go on that journey together, isn't it?
Yeah, and if I'm honest, tech has a bad rep in the enterprise space. It's always seen as very difficult. Integration is never going to happen. Implementation's going to take years. It's going to cost £1 million more than you promised it would. Like, that's typically the experience that most big organizations have had when it comes to new tech. And it's why digital transformation is, a whole industry in itself, and why people pay McKinsey and Deloitte and these companies tens of millions of pounds to do it, because it's incredibly difficult. And it's something that we've been really focused on, basically looking at every millimeter of that process and figuring out what can we do, what of that burden, what can we do for the client? So whether it's integration solutions, implementation, training, onboarding their stakeholders across the globe, we know what those challenges are going to be, and we just try to take as much of that pain away so the institution can focus on, just a fraction of those problems that are most pertinent and important to them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I guess then the reward for that as well is that you then get, those big deals and loyal clients that are going to stick with you and give you those growth opportunities as well, as you mentioned, with the kind of NRR and, other products that you can service them with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredible once you form those relationships, when, a lot of the sort of development we've done on the platform and value add and things like that is driven by our clients. And we're now in this great position where, we can look at something like whether it's our data insights. We've also just, when I say just, about 6 months ago, launched a video interview platform, so automated interviews for students.
Nice.
We're able to kind of design the basic user interface, in Figma or something like that, build a kind of a demoable prototype and say, hey, we're thinking of building this. It's going to be quite expensive and timely for us. It's going to take 3 to 6 months at best. If we build it, will you buy it? This is what we think it solves, and the amount of value you can get from a client when you've got a good relationship as well. They're like, yeah, you know what? We are spending thousands of hours interviewing students. We have all this expertise that could be focusing on, critical problem solving or high quality engagement, rather than sitting there in front of a screen doing, 2 students an hour manually, which is not a great experience for anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. When you see opportunities like that and put it to them, then do you position that as an add-on to what they're currently buying versus just, maybe this would be a nice feature to add?
Yeah, in the early days, I think when you're sort of getting to that first phase of feature completeness, you're adding features, for free, basically, because the product isn't finished. It's, a difficult stage for any startup. I'm sure every second person you speak to, Matt, mentions this, the danger of just saying yes to everything from clients, because there is a line in the sand where, pre that line being drawn, where they're adding pretty much constant value, because you start to see trends of requests and you actually build a great product. Then when you overstep the line, you start getting people that, become experts in your product and start having these amazing, incredible ideas of, these nth degree innovation and development you could build on the platform. And it gets to a point where you simply can't do it, because the cost of iterating on a complex piece of software, it might seem easy to add a line here and another button, but it might end up costing you $4,000 in engineering and product time to do that. And also you have to be considerate of the new users who are going to start using this product. Are we reducing the simplicity and starting to bring in an unnecessary level of complexity? So we're always all ears, on what people want, but largely now we'll take requests, and if they're of any sort of significance, we'll typically add it as something that's an upsell or a value add to the product, because at the end of the day, it's, the development costs are significant. You then obviously need to go out and market it and sell it and, turn it on, etc. So you can find a nice happy medium. And I think once you build a cadence with your clients where, they acknowledge that what you're doing is having a big impact and that it's not simple, even though you can make it look simple, they're quite willing to pay for it. And, Data Insights is a great example where we put together a, rather expensive team with, data engineer, data scientists, developers to build this upgrade. But by doing it that way, we're able to take that cost of a data team and then spread that cost out across a large number of clients. Whereas if our client went and tried to hire those 5 guys, they're going to be running up a bill of, God knows how many hundreds of thousands of pounds, when we can go and sell them, a much better outcome and solution for an absolute fraction of what that price costs. So we're very connected to our clients, to the industry, and, try to be as transparent as well about what we can and can't do, and maybe why we're not able to do everything as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good approach. And I think it just shows that throughout the journey that you've described, that customer relationship and connection with their problems and the people trying to solve those problems, is really, really strong. I think there's so much to be said for, maintaining really, really good customer relationships. And it's not, an email nurture sequence. It's nothing like that, but it is a genuinely deep connection rather than, something that's more surface level, trying to give the impression that you care about your customers. It's genuinely going the extra mile and working out exactly what their challenges are and how they evolve. Yeah.
And obviously being sort of more of an enterprise product, that's very different to someone who's got a B2C product, for example. You can't necessarily have that closer relationship, or it's more of a scale relationship that you can get that feedback. But I think what it reminds me of is something that, again, I learned back in the accelerator and, stuck with me, which is that sort of concept of product, market, channel, and model. I don't know, for any listeners, if you Google that, there's some really cool blogs and videos on the constant process of the relationship of your product and your market, that channel, and then your model. And I think, if you think about almost all the questions you're asking me, in a way, they're all sort of coming from one of those boxes. What's the impact of your product on your channel, or what's the impact of the channel on the model, or, et cetera. And it just goes on and on and on. And I think that's, the job that never ends for a startup or even for a mature company. As soon as you start dropping the ball on the relationship between those things, that's where, you can start to stagnate and start to lose that sort of innovative edge.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing that journey. Really, really interesting to hear the evolution that enroly has been through, the pivots, the evolutions, and the lessons learned. I think the audience will get a lot out of listening to this, especially if they are B2B, especially if they are looking at targeting enterprise customers as well. Listen to this episode, listen to it again, because there's a lot of great advice here, I think. So yeah, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Scale Up. Remember, for the show notes and in-depth resources from today's guest, you can find these on the website insidethescaleup.com. You can also leave feedback on today's episode, as well as suggest guests and companies you'd like to hear from. Thank you for listening.